Good evening, everyone. In today's session, we focus on strategic risk management. Right. You would recall from our previous risk management session that we did cover the concept of what risk management is. We did cover what enterprise risk management entails. And most importantly, we did identify or recognize that risk management is a degree of variability from what is expected. In addition to that, it is important that we understand that risk can be upside, meaning it can have positive consequences, or it can be downside, resulting in negative consequences. All right. Now, when we covered the concept of enterprise risk management, we looked at the various sources from which risk can emanate. And I did emphasize that one of the concepts that you can use is the personally analysis. We also did identify that in managing these risks, you may need to consider what we call the TARA model, meaning this is what we call risk mapping. And in the mapping of those risks, we did identify that risks are mapped by considering two planes. Firstly, the probability or the susceptibility of the risk occurring, as well as the severity or impact of that particular risk. So this is pervasive no matter what type of risk we are looking at. Right, in today's concept of strategic risk management, it is important that you also realize that there can be a degree of variability, right, to the expectations from a strategic point of view, right? And these strategies are normally affected simply because of either failure in the planning, right, or the implementation phase may also be inappropriate. Okay. Now, strategic risk is the risk that failed business decisions or lack thereof may pose to a company. Strategic risk is often a major factor in determining a company's worth. So an organization which constantly fails in its strategies, right, will not have a good market capitalization of its securities, right? Particularly observable if the company experiences a sharp decline in a short period of time. An organization may accept other strategic risks in the short term, but take action to reduce or eliminate those risks over a longer period of time. Now let's look at the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has affected many organizations not to realize their strategies. As a short-term effect, this can be acceptable. But what have organizations been doing to reduce or to eliminate such risks? Most organizations have decided to proceed working remotely or make use of technology to proceed in their operations. Okay, so the importance of technology in an organization's strategy can never be overemphasized, especially in today's era. Okay. Right. Strategic assumptions include any assumptions that are used to build a strategic plan, right? So these assumptions may be affected by a number of factors emanating from the various sources of risks that we looked at. So these various sources of risk will be a threat to the assumptions that the organization had in their strategic planning, right? By nature, assumptions can never be 100% accurate, but they are necessary to allow a business to move ahead with their strategic plans. So there's no strategy that is not built on an assumption. All strategies are built on assumptions. And with the building of those assumptions, right, an organization tries to align itself with those particular assumptions. An organization can embark in a scenario analysis by trying to identify a number of scenarios that the organization would be exposed to. That way, trying to realize its objectives. Now, we know that strategies are built on organizational objectives. And these objectives are finally what the organization wants to achieve. And in so doing, an organization will then have to build assumptions around those particular objectives to ensure that an organization becomes a success. Right? Now, organizational strategies or assumptions, right. Strategies are there to help organizations close the gap. When I say close the gap, between where they are and what they want to realize, right? These strategies must make each business unit very competitive, right? And they must take into consideration the direction that the organization wants to take in terms of growth, right? We know that there are 3 levels of strategy, right? Corporate level strategies, which an organization has to consider what businesses it has to be in, right? Mergers and acquisitions and various collaborations are part of these particular strategic decisions at corporate level, right? An organization may also need to consider its generic strategies, how to compete in that particular environment in order for it to be very competitive. Right. So where do problems come in? So problems with the selection of a strategy may emanate from the fact that a strategy might be too rigid, or may lack external focus, or may not consider the available resources and capabilities that the organization has, right? May not be flexible enough in a dynamic industry, or not formal enough and fail to identify risks or cannot raise finance. So an organization has to consider the principal budgeting factor in the synthesis of its strategies. All right. Now, in many markets, you'd find out that a principal budgeting factor may be finance or may be sales, which means demand, or many other factors which may have an effect on the strategies of the organization. Right? Your strategic choices could include determining what products and services to sell, where to sell them, how to sell them, and what target markets to sell them to. Right. So when looking at a competitive strategy of an organization, a competitive strategy is defined as the long-term plan of a particular company in order to gain competitive advantage over its competitors in the industry. It is aimed at creating defensive position in an industry and generating a superior return on investment. All right. Now, today's environment exposes organizations to what is known as the blue oceans strategy. Okay. Let me illustrate what the blue ocean strategy is, and then we can discuss it. Right. Everyone competes here. So there's a lot of blood, a lot of war, etc. So this is a red ocean. Okay. Now, an organization can identify an opportunity within a market and create its own market. Right? Creates its own market and thereby creating what is known as a blue ocean, meaning that there's no competition, right? And therefore it enjoys all the benefits of opening this particular market. And hence it is called a blue ocean. Now, what happens within this particular blue ocean is when others start seeing this organization benefit, they start moving towards the blue ocean and therefore becomes a red ocean eventually. Right. Now, as it becomes a red ocean eventually, right, it means this organization no longer enjoys the benefits as it used to. However, the first mover advantages of being more established, having a larger market share, and having good systems and processes in place will ensure that this organization remains the market leader. Now, if this organization also has a visionary as its CEO, right, and the directors which also have the ability to see the wood for the tree, it means that they will have the ability to create yet another blue ocean, resulting in this organization having the ability of constantly realizing its strategic objectives. Okay. So, an organization needs to have the ability to attract strategic thinkers to be its leaders, so as to be able to open these blue oceans every time and again. And an example in the South African environment is FNB, from a technological point of view, has had the ability to create blue oceans from a financial services perspective. All right. Now, it is important that an organization tries to identify the types of market and products it needs to invest in, right? So that it can ensure a success for that particular organization. This can be done through the use of what we call the growth strategies by ANSOF, right? Or what we call the ANSOF matrix. All right. Now, when we look at this ANSOF matrix, allow me to use the board once again. Right. When we look at the ANSOF matrix, it tries to identify the type of product and the type of market an organization uses for its strategy. Is it an existing or new market, existing or new product? So if an organization uses an existing product in an existing market to develop itself, right? We call this market penetration. Meaning that the organization is penetrating its existing market with the same product that it has, or products that it has, right? But if it decides to use new products into an existing market, we call that product development or new product development, right? Then an existing product in a new market, we call that market extension. We are extending the market, right? And a new product into a new market, we call that diversification. It's a diversification of the entity. Now, an organization can think this from a long-term perspective and decide how it can enter these chosen markets, right? So in order to enter this particular chosen market, right, an organization can decide to use tools like your mergers and acquisitions, Now, when I say tools like mergers and acquisitions, right? For instance, an organization can decide to penetrate its market by acquiring a competitor company. All right? An organization can decide to create a new product by acquiring a competitor, right? Or acquiring a small company that is tech ready. Okay. Now, not only they can decide to use organic methods of growth as well, maybe through an issue of shares, right? Now you see the integration now with strategic management as well as financial strategy, right? Now there are a number of strategic, financial, and legal considerations that the organization has to consider, right? Now, an organization can decide mergers and acquisitions or organic growth, right? There are advantages or there are considerations between the two. Mergers and acquisitions have cost implication. For instance, the industry standard payments to consultants or mergers and acquisition experts is between 5 to 12% of the deal value. That's the initial cost, right? Notwithstanding, there are additional costs that are paid as per the success rate of that particular deal. There's also lack of the knowledge of the other party associated with mergers and acquisitions. There are cultural issues that would need to be considered, IT integrations, and many other factors. But organic growth needs also consideration of the time to get established. Lack of skills, right? Effect on the entity's operational or the core operations of the entity, competitor reactions, lack of finance, etc. Okay. Another way is through the use of collaborations. Right. There are a number of collaborations that can be used, like for instance, joint ventures, strategic alliances, franchises, right? Licensing, outsourcing, etc. So with these collaborations, there are a number of risks associated with collaborations, just as there are risks associated with these. So what we are saying here is there should be considerations of what risks are there when these transactions are to be carried out. For instance, on the collaborations, you may need to consider the strategic fitness of the collaborating partner or the reputation associated with that particular partner. You may also need to consider the fact that costs can be shared, knowledge sharing as well, profit sharing, then loss of control. So in every strategic decision are risks. And now, what we have stated earlier is use of technology, disruption or technological disruption can never be overemphasized in today's strategy. If an organization ignores the importance of technology or technological disruption, then that organization is bound to fail. And hence, I have emphasized on the fact that you guys should have the knowledge of these modern technologies, how they work. You don't need to be able to code. You don't need to be able to be a developer, because developers and those who code are there to do the work for you. As a strategic leader, you're supposed to be able to advise and evaluate whatever position the organization is at, based on the technologies that we're talking about. Artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, right? Machine learning, blockchain, right? Etc. All those need to be considered. And a successful disruption for an organization should bring simplicity. A successful disruption should make use of less resources, meaning it should bring about efficiency for the organization. A successful disruption should be able to reduce costs for the entity. It should be accessible and provide quality of service, and should also bring conveniency to the organization and its stakeholders. Sorry for behaving like a preacher, but this is what I preach also. All right. So how does an organization maximize the reduction or management of strategic risks? An organization would then have to invest in scenario planning and stress testing. Okay. However, before the organization can invest in this, we've spoken about the higher level strategies. An organization may also need to consider its generic strategies. Porter's generic strategies, right? We've spoken about them in E3, right? Strategic management. An organization would need to consider whether it should enter the market, right, with a cost leadership strategy, with a differentiation strategy, or with a focus strategy. Focus can be focused cost leadership or focused differentiation strategy. Now we've got a cost leadership strategy is when an organization normally trades at a large scale in such a way that it enjoys less costs than any other. A differentiation strategy brings about uniqueness. And the uniqueness is mostly brought about by giving a high quality product. Or a focus strategy. Sometimes focus strategy is called niche marketing. Concentration, sometimes also referred to as concentration. A concentration or focus or niching can be done at a cost leadership level. Like for instance, in South Africa, we've got the USAVE brand of the ShopRite group. They are a cost leader, right? And I bet some of you might not have gone in the USAVE store. I have, right? Then we also have the focus differential strategy, still in the ShopRite group, looking at the food retail. We can look at Checkers. You do not find Checkers, right, in the locations, but you will find USAVE in the locations. So that is a focus strategy of the same brand. Okay. So scenario planning can be used to mitigate risks. Scenario planning's benefits is that it helps an organization to respond more quickly and appropriately than its competition. And scenario planning can be taken further to what we call stress testing, when an organization considers its worst case scenario to see if it will be able to perform in a situation where there's a worst case scenario. All right. A failure to realize its strategic goals, an organization can lose its reputation, resulting in what we call reputational risk. Reputational risk. So reputational risk, by definition, is defined as the beliefs or opinions that are generally held by someone or something. That is the SEMA way of defining reputational risk. Defined as the beliefs or opinions that are generally held about someone or something. So reputational risk is therefore the likelihood of an organization losing or gaining its people's opinions or opinions held about it by its various stakeholders. Because remember, risk can be upside or downside. So it's the likelihood of losses or gains accruing due to a deterioration or increase in the belief or opinion held about that particular organization by its stakeholders. So sources of the reputational risk, how an organization can lose its reputation, may be due to unethical behavior, transfer pricing fraud, employees, right, management, accounting irregularities, cybersecurity issues, or data protection. It can also emanate from an entity's control environment, its policies and procedures, lack of or having poor systems, right? Poor processes, people risk, or external events affecting the organization, resulting in a loss or gain of reputation. So by this, an organization tries to manage its reputational risk through a number of issues. The first one being ethics. An organization manages its ethical considerations from a SEMA point of view. We use the SEMA Code of Ethics, which has about 6 fundamental principles that should be considered by a SEMA student or member. We've got confidentiality, objectivity, professional competence and due care, professional behavior, integrity, and technical standards. Now, we will discuss this in depth in the next sessions, right? When we are applying, right? Now, very often, right, a professional may meet an ethical dilemma, right, in an organization, and one needs to consider a way of dealing with that particular ethical dilemma or conflict. Number one, issues should be documented, right? And there's also the seeking of professional advice, right, that a professional should do. The professional should also need to check facts before deciding on how to deal with the matter, right? If the facts show that there is really a conflict or an ethical dilemma, the professional may need to escalate internally, and if the matter is not dealt with properly internally, the professional may need to escalate externally. All right. And at the end of it all, the professional needs to refrain or refuse to be associated with the conflict or ethical dilemma. So there are a number of situations that a professional can be faced on with. For instance, you may be required to act contrary to law, contrary to technical or professional standards, do illegal dealings, intentionally misleading others, or many other factors. So in certain instances, you may need to seek professional advice. And you must always understand the threats associated with the fundamental principles. Self-interest, for instance, self-review, advocacy threats, right? Intimidation threats, right? Familiarity, or an adverse interest. So this is one way an organization deals with what do you call it? With the reputational risk that the organization may be susceptible to. Another thing that the organization may consider is corporate social responsibility. An organization will need to consider the risks and benefits associated with corporate social responsibility, right? Another thing that an organization may invest in is corporate governance, right? Corporate governance. In the South African environment, corporate governance is influenced, right, by the King 4 report to governance, right? There are international governance standards that are considered in the development of the integrated report, right? And for listed entities, the integrated report, the King 4 report has become very compulsory, as well as the integrated report, yes. has become compulsory according to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. All listed companies should conform with the standards and principles within the King 4 report and should provide integrated reports for their stakeholders. Okay, so with this, we come to the end of the session where we look at strategic risks. Now, you know that this is just an overview, right? And you need to know that there are two governance approaches: the rules-based governance approach and the principle-based governance approach. So this takes us to the end of our session today. I will see you in the next session. Thank you.